Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. In today's video, I'm going to pull out a video that's on a big long list of videos that I've had planned to record for quite a long time, and been a bit in the zone at the minute for making some new videos. So let's have a look at one from back when I was on my last integration project. So we had this question that came up about we're building an Azure integration solution and we needed to do some routing rules. And the question was really, where do we put these routing rules? So let's have a little bit of a look at this as an example. So the scenario we had was we've got messages from a plant from various different systems coming into a logic app, and then we hit service bus. And at a very, very high level, it's really simple that we've got various pub sub rules kicking in on service bus to go to different systems. So let's imagine I've simplified the diagram here. There's only two systems on the diagram, but let's imagine there might be 7 or 8 different systems. And at a high level, this works really well. The challenge comes when the messages coming out of the factory over here. There's not just one simple message which has one simple routing rule. So let's imagine we've got 30 different types of messages coming in, and actually within those messages, it's not as simple as message type 1 goes to Dynamics, message type 2 goes to SAP. We've got a more advanced scenario where we've got to do routing based on things in the message body. So the question's really, how do we do that message body routing? So, back in BizTalk days, we might have used something like a pipeline component to promote a context property from the message, and then we do routing based on the context property. The problem we had though is, let's imagine one of the messages, if we focus on one message type, so in there may be a list of codes from different systems in the plant, and let's say there's 3,000 codes and 20 of them go to Dynamics and 300 of them go to SAP, but that list for each system might change fairly frequently. So the challenge we get here is suddenly the service bus routing capability becomes quite a maintenance overhead, because we're going to have, let's say that list of 3,000 for SAP. So the question is, do we have a different subscriber for each one that forwards to the same queue? Or do we have some kind of like contains or something like that? And the rules get really, really messy and difficult to maintain. So we looked at other options to make keep the routing simple in service bus with something like a routing key, but we needed to put some kind of translation of the data in a given message type to the rule it would map to and make that easy to maintain. So let's have a look at a couple of the options that were discussed in this architecture. So the first one was the service bus option. So here we put all the rules inside service bus. We put maybe something like one subscription per code. Suddenly we've got 3,000 subscriptions, or we do it contains with a list, and suddenly that becomes a really big list that may or may not be supported in the message in the like the rule length. But really, the problem here is service bus becomes quite a maintenance overhead just because of the volume of rules, and then obviously every time it changes, it's not going to be that easy to see which rules have been implemented and which mappings and that kind of thing. If you do this, you're definitely going to need a infrastructure as code solution on service bus to maintain that as a very minimum. I think in Terraform you might have done it with something like a loop and a list of rules, and then you dynamically build a subscription for each one, something like that. But I think key point is it's going to become a bit of a pain. So option 2 was proposed by one of the application teams. So typically here, when this kind of thing comes up quite often, where people who aren't working in the integration platform will go, oh, well, it's really easy for us just to have a list here over in the source application at this side, and we'll have a list of this tag goes to this system. So tag 1 goes to Dynamics, tag 2 goes to SAP, tag 3 goes to SAP, and then they'll send a message and they'll put metadata on the message with those rules. But the problem, what will happen here is suddenly this becomes quite complex to maintain really quickly. So even though often the application team might think, well, we just need a dictionary, but suddenly you have a message for a code that goes to both systems. So how do you handle that? And very quickly you're leaking a lot of the logic of other systems into the plant system here. So for example, the plant system architecturally, if you're doing a pub sub architecture, it shouldn't really know SAP exists, it shouldn't know Dynamics exists, and the more awareness of those applications it has, the more you couple in your architecture, and you're creating complexity that'll limit flexibility, it'll limit velocity for building new systems. So really, it's often pushed as like a simple approach, but actually you're trading off a lot of architecture good practices that'll probably bite you later on. So we've kind of at this point we've ruled out a couple of options that we think will be either bad architecture or a maintenance problem. The next one would be target application filtering. So imagine all the messages come through here and we route every message to all systems. So if we imagine, SAP wanted 3,000 messages, 3,000 codes within a certain message type. Dynamics wanted 20, but now we're going to send everything to these integrations for both systems. And really, there's two places we can implement the filtering. So imagine, let's say there's 5,000 messages overall. So option number one would be for Dynamics, it doesn't really have a filtering capability, so we'd have to filter in this logic app here. And then the second thing is with the team we were working with could filter in SAP, so they could put some filtering rules in SAP in the processing of a message inside their web service, and they could decide what they wanted. Now, there's a couple of trade-offs here. So the first one is we're going to execute these two logic apps many more times than what we would need to. So if you imagine, if we filter it, the more we filter it this direction, the fewer times this logic app here is going to execute. So if we don't do any filtering at all, it's going to execute 5,000 times. If we filter it to just what they need, it's going to execute 20 times. So that could translate into a quite big cost difference and a performance difference. And then one of the examples over here was, I think in the case of the integration that I remember back in the day, we had to do this as like a convoy integration, this logic app here, because the SAP service needed them one at a time. So the problem we had was if we send 5,000 and SAP filters them out, that takes quite a lot of time to process when you only need a subset of the data. So again, the more we can filter them up the chain, leveraging Service Bus to only route what is needed, the better it's going to perform altogether. So I think ideally we'd take out this option from a performance perspective. So the next option we looked at was, well, let's just have a SQL database and we'll put some logic in this logic app that does a lookup. So every message that comes in looks up in the database, has a bit of logic to work out a routing key, drops it on Service Bus, and then we have a very simple routing that says, does it go to SAP or does it go to Dynamics? So this keeps a lot of the logic away from these target systems here. We got rid of the duplicate processing and the obsolete processing. We can put some stuff over here to make this easy to maintain, and we've encapsulated the logic potentially in one place. The trade-off, though, is that if we imagine we have 5,000 messages coming, that's going to be a lot of lookups on the database. So we'd want to have some kind of caching. We'd want to have kind of like an easy way to maintain and update that database. And I think sometimes one of the trade-offs here is people think, well, I can just go and change a row in the database, but suddenly you've lost your audit trail around that. You've lost your ability to to maintain and change control those changes and that kind of thing. So the routing rules become, you either trade off good governance to have more flexibility. And it just, again, it works. It's just a bit slower and it's a bit more of a pain to maintain it. But I think people often think it's a quick win. Now, what we ended up doing was something a bit different. So same kind of idea as the database, but what we actually did is we put some functions together for these written rules. And what worked really well is we could just use like a resource file with a bunch of JSON in it to do the translation. So we'd receive a message, call the function, and say, right, give me the root and keys, and which could be one or multiple for the message. Call the function, and then we just drop it onto service bus and let the root and key in service bus send it to the appropriate system. The benefits of the function app, so compared to the database lookup, the function app is going to be really quick. So it's going to be much quicker than constantly looking up in the database. It'll also scale up. So where if you think of the idea over here where I said this logic app needed to be a convoy, this one didn't need to be, but it could have, maybe say 10, 20 at a time being processed. But this logic app here, using the function, we can burst scale it out. So when it receives a whole bunch of messages, we process them really quickly, get them onto service bus with minimal overhead, and then we can load level just the ones we need to process. The other benefit of the function app is, it's a really lightweight component. So if we have that in a JSON file as a resource file with a little bit of C# code on top of it, the DevOps process probably fits into what you already have in place for deploying functions. So you can unit test it really well, you can deploy it with confidence, and you can deploy it really quickly. So often, a change would be requested, we would implement the change, and we'd have that out deployed into all the environments within like 10 minutes. It was really simple. We'd have a whole batch of unit tests. We'd make sure this component's really robust. So we've got really low risk around this. And the agility meant that actually the things that would slow down, a request here for we need to support a new code, really it was the business process of managing the change, telling us the details took longer than the implementation, which I think is what you really want from a technical perspective, really lightweight. But we also, compared to the database, not just the performance being much better, but also the governance from a pipeline deployment perspective and change control was much easier, because we don't have to worry about what else is in the database or patching in some kind of change scripts and that kind of thing. So it's a really good way for us to do this. I think that worked really well in my opinion. Now, I hope with this video, as I said, it was an old one from a few years ago where we did this pattern, but I thought it was quite interesting to discuss the different choices, because I think when we're in Azure integration services, especially if we've migrated from BizTalk, we don't have the promoted property routing that we have from the message box and service bus in the same way. You can achieve a lot of that functionality with service bus, but the property promotion bit before you hit the routing rules is kind of the key bit. And I think here the big benefit in Azure integration services is, one, we've got a number of different choices of how we do stuff. So in some cases I may have chosen the database because maybe I wanted to build a UI on top for users to change it or something. But in my case this time, the function app was better because I would get the throughput with the rules executing significantly quicker, but also because it was quite simple and I didn't need users to change it. I could just drop it into my deployment process. Job done. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for listening.